I watched them shove her again, harder this time, and she stumbled backward toward the stairwell. The orderly uniform hung loose on her small frame, her hair always pulled back in the same tight bun, and she never fought back, never raised her voice, never even looked them in the eye. The nurses called her Ghost because she moved through the halls so quietly, appearing and disappearing like she wasn't really there at all. But when that new trauma medic arrived for his first day and saw what happened next, he said something that made everyone in St. Catherine's Hospital realize they had no idea who they'd been tormenting for the past 2 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I've been working at St. Catherine's Hospital for 8 years. I've seen a lot of things in those halls, but nothing prepared me for what I witnessed that Tuesday morning in September. It started like any other day, with the usual chaos of a level 1 trauma center, but it ended with all of us questioning everything we thought we knew about the quiet woman who cleaned our floors. She arrived every morning at 4:30, 2 hours before the day shift officially began. I know this because I'm usually here that early too, catching up on patient charts and preparing for surgeries. Maria Santos, that was the name on her hospital ID badge, though I'd never heard anyone actually use it. Most people just called her the cleaning lady, if they called her anything at all. The younger residents and nurses had started calling her Ghost because of how silently she moved through the corridors, how she seemed to materialize whenever there was a mess to clean up, and how she could disappear just as quickly when people started talking about her. Maria was small, maybe 5 feet 2 inches, with prematurely gray hair that she always kept pulled back in a severe bun. Her uniform was always clean but never quite fit right, like she'd grabbed whatever size was available without caring how it looked. She had these dark brown eyes that seemed to take in everything, but revealed nothing. In the 2 years she'd been working at St. Catherine's, I'd maybe heard her speak a dozen words total, and never more than, "excuse me" or "sorry," when someone was in our way. The thing about hospital hierarchies is that they're rigid and unforgiving. Doctors at the top, then nurses, then technicians, then support staff, and somewhere near the bottom, the cleaning crew. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's how things work. Most of the medical staff treated Maria like she was invisible, which would have been bad enough, but some of them treated her worse than that. They treated her like she was disposable. Dr. Rebecca Hamilton was the worst of them. She was a second-year resident in emergency medicine, young and ambitious, and convinced that her MD made her superior to anyone without letters after their name. Rebecca had perfect blonde hair that never seemed to get messed up even during the longest shifts, a voice that carried just a little too well down the hospital corridors, and an attitude that made it clear she thought cleaning floors was beneath her notice, except when she could use it to make herself feel more important. It started small, the way these things always do. Rebecca would, accidentally, knock over her coffee cup when Maria was mopping nearby, then stand there tapping her foot impatiently while Maria cleaned it up again. She'd throw used paper towels on the floor right after Maria had emptied the trash, then make comments about how some people couldn't even handle simple tasks properly. She'd walk through freshly mopped areas in muddy shoes, and then loudly complain about the floors being dirty. The other residents started following Rebecca's lead. Dr. James Morrison, a surgery resident who was trying to impress the attendings, began leaving deliberately messy areas in the break room just to watch Maria clean them up. Dr. Lisa Park started making jokes about how the cleaning lady was so quiet she was probably planning something sinister, like she was collecting information for corporate espionage or industrial sabotage. Even some of the nurses joined in, treating Maria like entertainment rather than a human being doing her job. I'm ashamed to say I didn't speak up at first. I told myself it wasn't my business, that Maria seemed to handle it fine, that getting involved would just create more drama. But the truth is, I was taking the easy way out. It's always easier to look the other way when someone else is being mistreated, especially when speaking up might make you a target too. Maria never responded to any of it. She didn't file complaints, didn't fight back, didn't even seem to register the harassment. She just kept showing up every morning at 4:30, cleaning every surface with methodical precision, replacing supplies before they ran out, and maintaining the kind of spotless environment that a hospital requires to function. She worked with an efficiency that bordered on military precision, actually, though none of us thought much about that at the time. The worst incident happened on a Thursday morning in late August. Rebecca was having a particularly bad day because one of the attending physicians had criticized her patient assessment in front of the entire trauma team. She was angry and embarrassed and looking for someone to take it out on. Maria was mopping the hallway outside the trauma bays, moving slowly and carefully to avoid disrupting the constant flow of medical staff. Rebecca came storming out of Trauma Bay 3, still fuming from her dressing down, and nearly slipped on the wet floor. It wasn't Maria's fault. The area was clearly marked with wet floor signs, but Rebecca decided to make it her fault anyway. She started yelling about how irresponsible it was to mop during peak hours, how some people had no understanding of hospital operations, how this was exactly the kind of incompetence that put patients at risk. Maria stopped mopping and stood perfectly still, her hands gripping the mop handle, her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't apologize, didn't try to explain, didn't defend herself. She just waited for Rebecca to finish screaming. That only made Rebecca angrier. She grabbed the mop bucket and tipped it over, sending dirty water spreading across the hallway and into 2 patient rooms. "Clean it up," Rebecca snapped, "and maybe next time you'll think twice before creating hazards in my workplace." Maria didn't say a word. She went to get more supplies and started cleaning up the mess that Rebecca had made, working with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything else. The whole time, Rebecca stood there watching, making comments about how long it was taking, and how this was probably too complicated for someone with Maria's skill set. I was watching from the nurse's station, feeling sick to my stomach but still not saying anything. That's when I noticed something that the others missed. Maria's hands weren't shaking with fear or anger. They were completely steady, controlled, precise. She was cleaning up Rebecca's mess with the kind of calm focus that you usually only see in surgeons or pilots or people who've been trained to function under extreme pressure. After that incident, the harassment escalated. Rebecca had tasted blood and wanted more. She started recruiting other residents to participate in what she called keeping the staff accountable. They would leave increasingly elaborate messes for Maria to clean up, then time how long it took and criticize her efficiency. They would move her supplies to different locations and then complain when she took too long to find them. They would schedule their breaks to coincide with Maria's work areas, then make loud comments about how uncomfortable it was to eat around certain people. Dr. Morrison started taking pictures of Maria working, claiming it was for quality control documentation, but really just to humiliate her. Dr. Park would follow her around asking inappropriate questions about her personal life, her education, her immigration status. They treated her like a social experiment rather than a person, and the worst part was that they seemed to genuinely enjoy it. Maria endured all of this without complaint. She never missed a day of work, never showed up late, never let the quality of her cleaning slip. If anything, she seemed to work harder as the harassment increased, staying later to ensure every surface was perfect, every supply closet fully stocked, every piece of equipment properly maintained. She was like a machine, systematic and reliable and apparently immune to the psychological warfare being waged against her. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in September. Rebecca had been particularly vicious the day before, following Maria around the hospital and providing running commentary on her work performance for anyone within earshot. She'd made jokes about Maria's accent, her appearance, her intelligence, and her worth as a human being. Maria had taken it all in silence, as usual, but something about her posture had changed. She was holding herself differently, more rigidly, like she was bracing for impact. That Tuesday morning, Maria was cleaning the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors. It was a narrow space, barely wide enough for 2 people to pass each other, with concrete steps and metal railings that echoed every sound. She was working methodically, starting at the top and moving down, cleaning each step with the same careful attention she gave to everything else. Rebecca came down the stairs with Dr. Morrison and Dr. Park, all of them laughing about something that had happened during morning rounds. When they saw Maria, Rebecca's expression changed to that particular smile she got when she spotted an opportunity for entertainment. "Well, well," Rebecca said, her voice echoing in the stairwell. "If it isn't our favorite ghost, how are we doing today, Maria? Still pretending to understand what we're saying?" Maria didn't look up from her work. She was scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain on one of the middle steps, her movements careful and controlled. Rebecca took another step down, moving closer. "I'm talking to you," Rebecca said, louder this time. "The least you could do is acknowledge me when I'm being polite." Maria glanced up briefly, made eye contact for maybe half a second, then returned to her work. It wasn't defiant, wasn't dismissive, just acknowledgement without engagement. But Rebecca interpreted it as disrespect. "Did you just ignore me?" Rebecca's voice was rising now, taking on that edge it got when she felt her authority was being challenged. "Do you think because you've been here for a couple years that you can just blow off medical staff?" Dr. Morrison stepped closer, feeding off Rebecca's energy. "Maybe she doesn't understand English as well as we thought. Should we speak slower?" Dr. Park laughed, but it was an uncomfortable sound. Even she seemed to realize they were crossing a line. "Rebecca, maybe we should just—" "No," Rebecca cut her off. "I'm tired of being treated like I don't exist by the help. She needs to learn some respect." Rebecca moved down another step, now standing directly above Maria, who was still crouched on the stairs with her cleaning supplies spread around her. The power dynamic was unmistakable, threatening, deliberate. "Stand up when I'm talking to you," Rebecca demanded. Maria continued cleaning for another few seconds, then slowly started to rise. She was gathering her supplies, clearly trying to move out of the way and diffuse the situation. But Rebecca wasn't done. "Where do you think you're going? I'm not finished with you yet." Rebecca reached out and grabbed Maria's shoulder, not gently. Maria pulled away instinctively, and that's when everything went wrong. Rebecca, off balance and angry, pushed back. Hard. Maria stumbled backward down the stairs, her cleaning supplies scattering. She tried to catch herself on the railing but missed. I heard the impact from 2 floors down, the sound of a human body hitting concrete steps, followed by the crash of a mop bucket tumbling down after her. The stairwell went completely silent, except for the echo of those impacts, slowly fading away. Dr. Morrison was the first to speak, his voice tight with sudden fear. "Oh God, Rebecca, what did you just do?" Dr. Park was already moving down the stairs toward where Maria had fallen. "Is she okay? Maria, are you all right?" Rebecca stood frozen, her face pale, finally realizing that she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I didn't mean to." She pulled away. "I was just trying to." Maria was lying at the bottom of the stairwell, her legs twisted at an unnatural angle, her uniform torn, her cleaning supplies scattered around her like debris from an explosion. She wasn't moving. Dr. Park reached her first and immediately started checking for vital signs. "She's unconscious. Rebecca, get down here now. Morrison, call for a trauma team." Rebecca stumbled down the stairs, her medical training finally overriding her panic. "How bad is it? Is she breathing?" "She's breathing, but she definitely hit her head. And I think her left leg might be broken. Help me stabilize her neck while we wait for the team." They worked together to ensure Maria's airway was clear, and her spine was immobilized. The same medical professionals who'd been tormenting her now desperately trying to save her life. The irony wasn't lost on any of them, but there wasn't time to process it. When someone's life is in danger, training takes over. The trauma team arrived within minutes, led by Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the head of emergency medicine. They quickly assessed Maria's condition and prepared to transport her to the trauma bay. Possible concussion, definite leg fracture, multiple contusions, and who knew what internal injuries might be lurking beneath the surface. As they loaded Maria onto a stretcher, Dr. Rodriguez looked at the 3 residents who were standing there, covered in guilt and fear. "What happened here?" Rebecca opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "How do you explain that you pushed someone down a flight of stairs because you were angry and wanted to feel powerful? How do you justify 2 years of systematic harassment that led to this moment?" Dr. Morrison stepped forward. "There was an accident. She fell down the stairs while she was working. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the truth either." Dr. Rodriguez looked at them for a long moment, clearly sensing there was more to the story. But his priority was getting Maria the medical attention she needed. "We'll deal with the details later," he said. "Right now, let's focus on treating our patient." They wheeled Maria away to Trauma Bay 1, the same bay where Rebecca had been humiliated by an attending physician the week before. The same bay where Maria had cleaned up countless messes and witnessed countless emergencies and never been acknowledged as anything more than part of the background. Word spread quickly through the hospital that the cleaning lady had been seriously injured in a fall. Some people were genuinely concerned, Others were mostly worried about who was going to clean the bathrooms on the 4th floor. But everyone was talking about it. Because accidents like this raised questions about liability and insurance, and whether proper safety protocols had been followed. Rebecca, Morrison, and Park were questioned by hospital administration, by security, by the Incident Review Committee. They stuck to their story about an accidental fall, but the details didn't quite add up. Why were 3 medical residents in a service stairwell during their shift? Why were there no witness statements from other staff members? Why did the pattern of Maria's injuries suggest she'd been pushed, rather than simply lost her footing? I knew I should speak up. I'd seen enough of the harassment to know this wasn't really an accident, but I also knew that accusing 3 residents of assault would destroy their careers and potentially expose me to retaliation. So I kept quiet like I'd been doing for 2 years and told myself that Maria would recover and hopefully this would be a wake-up call for everyone to treat her better. Maria was in surgery for 4 hours. Fractured tibia, severe concussion, internal bleeding that required immediate intervention. She was lucky to be alive, Dr. Rodriguez told us later, a few inches different, and she could have broken her neck or suffered fatal head trauma. While she was in surgery, I found myself thinking about all the things I'd observed about Maria over the past 2 years. Her military precision in everything she did. Her complete emotional control under pressure. The way she seemed to anticipate problems before they happened, and always had exactly the right supplies ready. The fact that she never took sick days, never complained about working conditions, never seemed intimidated by the medical environment that overwhelmed most new employees. I'd assumed she was just naturally suited to cleaning work, but now I was wondering if there might be more to her story. People don't usually develop that level of systematic thinking and stress tolerance from janitorial training. It reminded me of something, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Maria was moved to the ICU after surgery, still unconscious from the anesthesia and concussion. Dr. Rodriguez was optimistic about her recovery, but warned that head injuries could be unpredictable. She might wake up perfectly fine, or there might be complications that wouldn't become apparent for days or weeks. Rebecca was a wreck. She'd stopped eating, stopped sleeping, couldn't focus on her patients. The other residents were giving her a wide berth, partly because they were afraid of being associated with the incident, and partly because the guilt was radiating off her like heat from a fever. She kept visiting Maria's room, standing in the doorway looking at the unconscious woman she'd nearly killed. Dr. Morrison and Dr. Park were handling things better on the surface, but I could see the strain. They'd gone from confident young doctors to nervous, paranoid residents who jumped every time someone mentioned the incident review or asked them questions about their version of events. The hospital administration was conducting a thorough investigation, partly because they were genuinely concerned about patient and employee safety, and partly because they were terrified of a lawsuit. Maria was an employee who'd been injured on hospital property, possibly due to the negligence or misconduct of other employees. The legal and financial implications were staggering. 2 days after the incident, Maria finally woke up, groggy and confused at first, but conscious and responsive. Dr. Rodriguez ran a series of neurological tests and determined that while she had suffered a significant concussion, there didn't appear to be any permanent brain damage. Her leg would take months to heal properly, but she was going to be okay. The first thing she asked for when she was fully awake wasn't pain medication or water or information about her injuries. She asked if the floors on the 4th floor were being properly maintained while she was out of commission. Even after nearly dying, her first concern was whether her work was being done correctly. Dr. Rodriguez assured her that temporary cleaning staff had been brought in and that she shouldn't worry about work while she was recovering. But Maria seemed genuinely distressed by the idea that her responsibilities weren't being handled to her standards. "They don't know the proper disinfection protocols for the trauma bays," she said, speaking more words in one sentence than most of us had heard from her in 2 years. "The surgical suites require specific cleaning sequences. The isolation rooms have containment procedures that temp staff won't understand." Her voice was hoarse from the breathing tube during surgery, but there was an authority in it that none of us had heard before. She wasn't speaking like a cleaning lady concerned about job security. She was speaking like someone who understood complex operational systems and was worried about critical procedures being compromised. Dr. Rodriguez looked puzzled. "Maria, you've been doing excellent work, but the temporary staff are trained professionals. They know how to maintain a sterile environment. Maria tried to sit up straighter, wincing from the pain in her leg and ribs. "With respect, doctor, hospital cleaning isn't just about making things look clean. Cross-contamination protocols vary by department, based on infection risks. The chemotherapy ward requires different procedures than the pediatric unit. Emergency areas have rapid turnover protocols that regular cleaning staff don't usually understand." Everyone in the room was staring at her now. This was the woman they'd dismissed as barely capable of understanding English, and she was giving a lecture on hospital hygiene protocols that sounded like it came from an infection control textbook. Dr. Rodriguez sat down in the visitor's chair, clearly intrigued. "How do you know so much about specialized medical cleaning procedures?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her deciding how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "I've worked in medical facilities before. Different types of facilities." That was all she would say about it, but it was enough to make everyone in the room realize that we'd been making assumptions about Maria's background and qualifications that were apparently completely wrong. Over the next few days, as Maria's condition improved, small details about her knowledge and experience began to emerge. She corrected a nurse who was using the wrong cleaning solution in an isolation room. She pointed out a flaw in the hospital's supply chain system that was causing shortages of critical disinfectants. She suggested modifications to the cleaning schedule that would improve efficiency without compromising safety standards. Each revelation made it clearer that Maria wasn't just a cleaning lady who'd learned her job through repetition. She had deep, technical knowledge of medical facility operations that went far beyond what any normal cleaning training would provide. But when pressed for details about her background, she would only say that she'd worked in different types of facilities before coming to St. Catherine's. The Incident Review Committee was scheduled to meet on Friday, 1 week after the stairwell accident. Rebecca, Morrison, and Park would have to give formal statements about what happened, and the committee would determine whether any disciplinary action was warranted. Everyone was nervous because these reviews could result in anything from additional training requirements to immediate termination. Rebecca had been to see Maria every day since she'd woken up, clearly desperate to apologize and somehow make things right. But Maria had been polite, but distant, treating Rebecca like any other medical professional rather than someone who'd nearly killed her. It was almost worse than anger would have been, because it suggested that Maria had expected this kind of treatment and wasn't particularly surprised by it. On Thursday evening, I was updating patient charts when I heard Rebecca talking to Dr. Rodriguez in the hallway outside Maria's room. "I need to know if she's going to press charges," Rebecca was saying, her voice tight with anxiety. "I know what I did was wrong, but it wasn't intentional. I was angry about something else and I took it out on her, but I never meant for her to get hurt." Dr. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "That's not really my decision to make, Rebecca. But I will say this. Maria hasn't asked about lawyers or liability or anything like that. Her main concern seems to be getting back to work as quickly as possible." "That's what I don't understand," Rebecca said, frustration creeping into her voice. "She should be furious. She should want to see me fired or arrested or at least make me grovel. But she acts like getting pushed down a flight of stairs is just part of her normal day." "Maybe it is," Dr. Rodriguez said quietly. There was something in his tone that made me look up from my charts. He was looking through the window into Maria's room with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity, not curiosity, but something more complex. Like he was putting together pieces of a puzzle that the rest of us were still missing. That's when the new trauma medic arrived for his first day at St. Catherine's Hospital. Combat Medic Sergeant First Class David Turner recently returned from a deployment in Afghanistan and transitioning to civilian medical work. He was supposed to start his orientation that Friday morning, but he'd come in Thursday evening to complete some paperwork and get familiar with the facility. And when Sergeant Turner saw Maria Santos lying in that hospital bed, everything changed. Sergeant Turner stood in the doorway of Maria's room for exactly 7 seconds without moving, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, recognition, and something that looked like reverence. He was a tall man, maybe 6'1", with the kind of posture that screamed military, even in civilian clothes. His dark hair was regulation short, and there were small scars on his hands that spoke of field work under difficult conditions. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, the way they locked onto Maria with the intensity of someone who'd just seen a ghost. Dr. Rodriguez noticed Turner standing there and approached him with the friendly professionalism he used for new staff members. You must be Sergeant Turner. I'm Dr. Rodriguez, head of emergency medicine. You're starting orientation tomorrow, right? Turner didn't respond immediately. His attention remained fixed on Maria, who was sitting up in bed reviewing what looked like hospital supply inventory sheets that someone had brought her at her request. She hadn't noticed the new arrival yet, focused entirely on the documentation in front of her. Sergeant Turner? Dr. Rodriguez tried again, following Turner's gaze into the room. Is everything all right? Turner finally looked at Dr. Rodriguez, and when he spoke, his voice had the careful control of someone trying to manage a significant emotional response. The woman in that bed, Maria Santos. How long has she been working here? Dr. Rodriguez glanced back at Maria, then at Turner with growing curiosity. About 2 years. She's one of our cleaning staff. Actually, she's the reason I'm here this evening. She was injured in an accident earlier this week, and we're monitoring her recovery. An accident, Turner repeated, and there was something in his tone that suggested he understood exactly what kind of accident might happen to someone like Maria in a place like this. What kind of accident? She fell down a stairwell while working. Concussion, broken leg, some internal injuries. She's been recovering well, though. Dr. Rodriguez paused, studying Turner's face. Do you know her from somewhere? Turner took a deep breath, the kind of breath people take when they're about to say something that will change everything. Doctor, that woman isn't just a cleaning lady. Her name isn't Maria Santos. It's Dr. Maria Restrepo, and she's one of the most decorated field surgeons in the history of the United States military. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Dr. Rodriguez blinked several times, processing what he'd just heard. I'm sorry, did you say field surgeon? Combat surgeon, to be precise. Special Operations Medical Officer. She served 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and participated in classified missions I can't even tell you about. Turner's voice was gaining strength, the initial shock giving way to something that sounded like pride mixed with anger. She's saved more lives under fire than most doctors will save in their entire careers. Dr. Rodriguez looked through the window at Maria, who was still focused on her paperwork, completely unaware of the conversation happening outside her room. Are you certain it's the same person? Because our Maria Santos has been working as a cleaner for 2 years. No medical background on her employment file. Turner pulled out his phone and scrolled through what looked like military personnel photos. He found what he was looking for and showed the screen to Dr. Rodriguez. It was clearly Maria, but in military dress uniform with more ribbons and medals than I could count from where I was sitting at the nurses' station. That was taken at a ceremony in 2018, Turner said quietly. She'd just completed a 72-hour surgical marathon during a siege in Kandahar. Operated on 47 casualties without leaving the operating tent. When the base was finally relieved, they found her passed out over the surgical table, still holding a scalpel. Doctor. Rodriguez stared at the photo, then at Maria, then back at the photo. This doesn't make sense. Why would a decorated military surgeon be working as a cleaner in a civilian hospital? Because something happened that made her disappear from official records. Something bad enough that she needed to become someone else entirely. Turner put his phone away and looked directly at Dr. Rodriguez. And if she's working under an assumed identity, it means she's either hiding from something or protecting something. People like Dr. Restrepo don't just vanish unless they have to. Rebecca had appeared in the hallway during this conversation, drawn by the intensity of the discussion. She'd been coming to check on Maria for the 5th time that day, still consumed with guilt over the stairwell incident. But now she was standing there listening to 2 men discuss the possibility that the woman she'd been tormenting for 2 years was actually a highly decorated military surgeon. That's impossible, Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. She barely speaks English. She doesn't know anything about medical procedures. She's just a cleaning lady. Turner turned to look at Rebecca with the kind of cold assessment that made it clear he could read people extremely well. You're Dr. Hamilton, aren't you? The one who was involved in her accident. Rebecca's face went pale. How did you know that? Because I've seen what happens to people like Dr. Restrepo when they're placed in hostile environments. They go invisible. They become whatever people expect them to be. They endure whatever treatment they receive because they're trained to survive in situations where fighting back isn't an option. Turner's voice was getting harder now, edged with the kind of controlled anger that suggested he'd seen too much of this kind of thing. And people like you mistake their survival strategy for weakness. Dr. Rodriguez was still trying to process the implications of what Turner was telling them. If she really is a military surgeon, why hasn't she said anything? Why let people treat her like she's uneducated or incompetent? Because she's following protocol, Turner said simply. When special operations personnel go deep cover, they stay in character no matter what. They endure whatever they have to endure to maintain their operational security. The fact that she's been here for 2 years without breaking character suggests she's either on assignment or in witness protection. Rebecca was shaking her head, denial written across her face. No, you're wrong. I've worked with her for 2 years. I would have known if she was a doctor. She never corrected us when we made medical mistakes around her. She never showed any sign of medical knowledge. Didn't she? Dr. Rodriguez said slowly, and I could see him starting to piece things together. Actually, now that I think about it, there have been several times when she made suggestions about cleaning protocols that seemed unusually sophisticated. And since she's been recovering, she's demonstrated knowledge of hospital operations that goes well beyond normal cleaning training. Turner nodded grimly. She's been watching you all work for 2 years. Watching mistakes, watching inefficiencies, watching people get hurt by preventable errors. And she couldn't say anything because breaking cover would compromise whatever mission or protection status brought her here in the first place. The implications of this were starting to hit Rebecca like physical blows. Oh God. If she's really a surgeon, then every time we made jokes about her intelligence, every time we treated her like she was stupid or incompetent. You were torturing someone who could probably perform surgery in her sleep, Turner finished. Someone who saved countless lives under conditions you can't even imagine. Someone who's been watching you struggle with basic medical procedures while being forced to pretend she doesn't know how to do them better. Dr. Rodriguez was looking through the window at Maria again, this time seeing her completely differently. We need to talk to her. If she really is Dr. Restrepo, she should know that her cover has been compromised. Turner hesitated. That's not my call to make. If she's under official protection, approaching her directly could put her in danger. But if she's just hiding from her past, then maybe it's time for her to stop running. That's when Maria looked up from her paperwork and saw the 3 of them standing outside her room having an intense conversation while staring at her. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Not fear exactly, but the kind of sharp alertness that comes from years of assessing threats and calculating options in dangerous situations. She set down her papers and looked directly at Turner through the window. Even from my position at the nurse's station, I could see the moment of recognition pass between them. Turner straightened slightly, an unconscious response to encountering a superior officer. Maria's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle reminder of the authority she'd once wielded. Turner made a decision. He walked into the room, followed by Dr. Rodriguez and Rebecca, who was still struggling to accept what she was hearing. I abandoned any pretense of working on patient charts and moved closer so I could hear what was about to happen. Dr. Restrepo, Turner said, his voice carrying the respect of one medical professional addressing another. It's an honor to meet you, ma'am. Maria was quiet for a long moment, studying Turner's face. When she finally spoke, her voice was different than it had been for the past 2 years. Still quiet, but with an authority that hadn't been there before. Combat Medic Turner, I presume. Fort Bragg, 3rd Rotation, Afghanistan. You worked under Dr. Patterson at the Forward Surgical Unit in Helmand Province. Turner's eyes widened. You know about my service record? I know about everyone's service record. It was my job to know. Maria looked at Dr. Rodriguez and Rebecca, then back at Turner. I'm assuming my operational identity has been compromised. Yes, ma'am. I recognized you immediately. Dr. Rodriguez and Dr. Hamilton now know who you really are. Maria nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting this moment for 2 years and was almost relieved that it had finally arrived. How much have you told them? Just the basics. That you're a decorated combat surgeon. I didn't provide details about specific operations or the circumstances that brought you here. Good. Maria adjusted her position in the bed, wincing slightly from her injuries. Dr. Rodriguez, I believe you have questions. Dr. Rodriguez sat down heavily in the visitor's chair, clearly overwhelmed by the revelations of the past few minutes. I don't even know where to start. Are you really Dr. Maria Restrepo, the field surgeon? I was Dr. Maria Restrepo. For the past 2 years, I've been Maria Santos, cleaning specialist. Both identities served their purpose. Rebecca was standing near the door, looking like she might collapse or flee at any moment. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us treat you like you were uneducated? Why did you let us humiliate you when you could have put us in our place with a single sentence? Maria looked at Rebecca with something that might have been pity. Because maintaining operational security was more important than protecting my ego. Because I've endured much worse treatment in much more dangerous places. And because sometimes the best way to assess a situation is to become invisible and observe how people behave when they think no one important is watching. The room fell silent as the weight of that statement settled over everyone. Maria had been watching them for 2 years, cataloging their behavior, their competence, their character, while they treated her like she was beneath their notice. Turner was studying Maria's face with growing concern. Dr. Restrepo, if you don't mind me asking, what brought you here? The last official record I can find of your service was the Kandahar incident in 2018. After that, you just disappeared from all military databases. Maria was quiet for so long that I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was captured during a medical evacuation mission in Syria. Officially, that mission never happened. Officially, I was never there. The men who took me weren't interested in military intelligence. They were interested in demonstrating what happened to women who dared to treat their enemies. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Turner's face went rigid with controlled anger. Dr. Rodriguez looked sick. Rebecca made a small sound that might have been a gasp or a sob. How long? Turner asked, his voice tight. 14 months. They kept me alive because they needed someone with medical training to treat their own wounded. But they wanted to make sure I understood my place in their hierarchy. Maria pulled up the sleeve of her hospital gown, revealing her left arm. What I had always assumed were old burns from cooking accidents were actually something much more systematic and deliberate. Parallel scars that formed a pattern, cigarette burns that spelled out words in Arabic script, marks that spoke of calculated cruelty designed to break someone's spirit. Rebecca backed up until she hit the wall, her hand over her mouth. Doctor, Rodriguez closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. Turner stood at attention, the way soldiers do when honoring fallen comrades. The rescue mission that extracted me was also unofficial, Maria continued, rolling her sleeve back down. By the time I was recovered, the political situation had changed. It was decided that my capture and torture couldn't be acknowledged without creating diplomatic complications. So Dr. Maria Restrepo was retired from official service and given a new identity. They abandoned you, Turner said, and it wasn't a question. They protected national interests. I understood the necessity of the decision. Dr. Rodriguez finally found his voice. So you've been working here under witness protection? Not exactly. The identity transition was official, but the placement was my choice. I needed to disappear completely, and I needed work that would allow me to help people without drawing attention to my medical training. Turner was putting the pieces together. So you chose cleaning work in a hospital because it would let you stay close to medicine without being able to practice it. And because I could still save lives, just in different ways. Preventing infections through proper sanitation protocols. Identifying equipment failures before they become critical. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ensuring supply chains function properly during emergencies. Maria looked around the room at the people who'd spent 2 years dismissing her contributions. You'd be surprised how many lives are saved by people who never touch a patient. Rebecca was crying now. Quiet tears that she wasn't bothering to wipe away. We had no idea. All those times we made fun of you, all those times we treated you like you were stupid or worthless. You were watching us make mistakes that you could have prevented. Yes. Did people die because you couldn't help them? Because maintaining your cover was more important than using your medical training? Maria was quiet for a moment, and when she answered, her voice carried the weight of 2 years of impossible choices. No one died who wouldn't have died anyway. I found ways to help when I could, without compromising my identity. Anonymous tips about misdiagnoses. Equipment mysteriously fixed before it could fail. Supply shortages that never quite materialized because someone had quietly ordered replacement inventory. Dr. Rodriguez was staring at her with a mixture of awe and horror. You've been practicing medicine in secret for 2 years. Without credit, without recognition, without being able to claim your successes. I've been serving in the capacity that circumstances allowed, the same way I served in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq. The mission parameters changed, but the core objective remained the same. Turner walked closer to Maria's bed, his expression serious. Dr. Restrepo, with respect, your cover is blown now. Half the hospital is going to know about this conversation by tomorrow morning. You can't go back to being invisible. Maria nodded slowly. I know. The question is whether I can continue serving here in my actual capacity, or whether I need to disappear again and start over somewhere else. Dr. Rodriguez stood up suddenly, his decision made. You're not going anywhere. This hospital needs you. Not as a cleaning lady, not as someone hiding in the background, but as Dr. Maria Restrepo. We need your expertise, your experience, your knowledge. I don't have current medical licenses. My certifications expired during my captivity. I haven't practiced surgery in over 3 years. Then we'll get you recertified. We'll sponsor your license renewal. We'll create a position that uses your skills properly. Dr. Rodriguez was gaining momentum now, speaking with the authority of someone who just realized he had a world-class surgeon working as a janitor in his hospital. You know this facility better than anyone. You understand our operations, our weaknesses, our needs. You could revolutionize how we approach emergency medicine. Turner was nodding approvingly. Dr. Rodriguez is right. You've completed an unofficial 2-year assessment of this facility's operations. You know exactly what needs to be fixed and how to fix it. Rebecca stepped forward hesitantly, her voice shaking. Dr. Restrepo, I need to apologize. Not just for pushing you down the stairs, but for 2 years of treating you like you were beneath my notice. For making jokes about your intelligence when you were watching me struggle with basic procedures you could do in your sleep. Maria looked at Rebecca for a long moment. Dr. Hamilton, your technical skills are adequate, but your patient interaction protocols need significant improvement. Your diagnostic methodology is too narrow, and you tend to miss critical details when you're under pressure. You also have a dangerous tendency to let personal frustration affect your professional judgment. Rebecca flinched as if she'd been slapped. It was a brutally accurate assessment delivered in the calm, professional tone of a superior officer conducting a performance review. However, Maria continued, your surgical technique shows promise, and you demonstrate genuine care for patient outcomes when you're not distracted by ego concerns. With proper mentoring, you could become a competent emergency physician. It was both a devastating critique and an offer of redemption. Rebecca started crying harder, overwhelmed by the realization that the woman she'd tormented could still see potential in her worth developing. Dr. Rodriguez was already making plans. We'll need to brief the hospital administration immediately. There will be paperwork, background checks, credential verification. But I want you back in a surgical capacity as soon as possible. There's something else you should know, Maria said quietly. The reason I chose St. Catherine specifically wasn't random. This hospital was identified as a potential target for terrorist attacks due to its proximity to government facilities and its role in treating federal employees. I've been conducting informal security assessments for the past 2 years. Turner's expression sharpened immediately. What kind of threats? Mostly surveillance activities that suggested planning phases for potential attacks, personnel asking unusual questions about staff schedules, building layouts, emergency protocols, vehicles conducting repeated reconnaissance of entry and exit points. Nothing imminent, but enough to suggest this facility was being evaluated as a target. Dr. Rodriguez looked stunned. Are you saying you've been working undercover security for 2 years while cleaning our floors? I've been serving in whatever capacity was needed to protect lives. Sometimes that meant ensuring surgical suites were properly sterilized. Sometimes it meant identifying potential security threats. Maria looked directly at Turner. There's a maintenance contractor who started 3 weeks ago. Pakistani national, recent immigrant. No previous hospital experience, but somehow familiar with building security systems. He's been asking questions about pharmaceutical storage and patient database access. Turner was already pulling out his phone. I need to report this to base security immediately. I've been documenting his activities, but I couldn't report them without compromising my cover. Now that my identity is exposed, I can provide full briefings on everything I've observed. The room was spinning with implications. Not only was Maria a decorated combat surgeon working as a janitor, she'd also been functioning as an unofficial security officer, protecting the hospital from threats that no one else had even noticed. Dr. Rodriguez sat down again, overwhelmed by the scope of what he was learning. Dr. Restrepo, how many lives do you think you've saved in the past 2 years through your unofficial activities? Maria considered the question seriously. Difficult to quantify. Prevented infections that would have led to sepsis in approximately 40 patients. Identified equipment failures that would have resulted in surgical complications in maybe 15 cases. Maintained supply chain integrity that prevented shortages during 3 emergency situations. Provided early warning about security threats that could have resulted in mass casualties. And we treated you like you were worthless, Rebecca whispered. You treated me exactly as I needed to be treated to maintain operational effectiveness. Your behavior, while personally difficult, allowed me to remain invisible and continue my mission. Turner was finishing his security call and returned his attention to the conversation. Dr. Restrepo, I reported the security concerns to the appropriate authorities. They'll want to debrief you extensively about everything you've observed. I'm prepared for that. I've maintained detailed records of all security-relevant activities. Dr. Rodriguez was shaking his head in amazement. Where have you been keeping these records? We never saw you with anything except cleaning supplies. For the first time since her identity had been revealed, Maria smiled slightly. Dr. Rodriguez, I've been trained to gather and maintain intelligence in hostile territory where discovery means death. Hiding documentation in a civilian hospital wasn't particularly challenging. She reached under her mattress and withdrew a small, sealed plastic bag containing what looked like multiple micro SD cards. Photographic surveillance of suspicious individuals, documentation of security vulnerabilities, records of maintenance issues that could compromise patient safety, and detailed assessments of staff performance across all departments. Quote, Turner whistled softly. Ma'am, you've been conducting a comprehensive 2-year intelligence operation while working as a janitor. I've been serving my country and protecting lives using whatever tools and cover identity were available to me. The specific methods were less important than the mission objectives. Rebecca was staring at the micro SD cards like they contained classified nuclear secrets. You've been evaluating our performance for 2 years. What did you think of us? What did you think of me? Maria looked at Rebecca with something that might have been compassion. Dr. Hamilton, you're a talented physician with significant room for growth. Your primary weaknesses are arrogance and insecurity, which manifest as cruelty toward people you perceive as inferior. But your core competencies are sound, and your dedication to patient care is genuine. It was another brutally honest assessment, but delivered with the clinical detachment of someone conducting a professional evaluation rather than seeking revenge. Dr. Rodriguez was starting to grasp the full implications of the situation. Dr. Restrepo, you've essentially conducted a 2-year audit of this entire hospital while maintaining deep cover as a cleaning lady. You know more about our operations than anyone in administration. That was the point. You can't fix problems you can't see, and you can't see problems when people modify their behavior because they know they're being observed. Turner was looking at Maria with the kind of respect usually reserved for commanding officers. Ma'am, what you've accomplished here is extraordinary. Most intelligence officers would consider this a textbook example of successful long-term surveillance and assessment. It wasn't intelligence work, Sergeant Turner. It was medical work. I took an oath to do no harm and to preserve life. For the past 2 years, I've been honoring that oath in the only way circumstances allowed. The room fell quiet as everyone processed the magnitude of what they'd learned. Maria wasn't just a decorated combat surgeon. She wasn't just a torture survivor. She wasn't just someone hiding from her past. She was someone who'd spent 2 years conducting the most comprehensive assessment of hospital operations any of them had ever heard of, all while enduring systematic mistreatment from the very people she was secretly protecting. Rebecca finally found her voice again. Dr. Restrepo, can you ever forgive us? Can you ever forgive me? Maria studied Rebecca's face for a long moment. Dr. Hamilton, Forgiveness implies that I was personally injured by your actions. I wasn't. I was performing a mission that required enduring hostile behavior while maintaining operational security. Your actions, while unprofessional, were simply part of the operational environment I was trained to navigate. But I pushed you down the stairs. I could have killed you. Yes, that was unfortunate. It compromised my cover and endangered the mission, but it also created an opportunity to transition from covert to overt operations, which may ultimately be more beneficial to patient care at this facility. Dr. Rodriguez was staring at Maria with something approaching awe. You're talking about getting pushed down a flight of stairs like it was a tactical decision. Everything is a tactical decision when you're operating in hostile territory, Dr. Rodriguez. The question is whether the outcome advances or compromises your mission objectives. Turner checked his watch and looked at Dr. Rodriguez. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to contact my former commanding officer about Dr. Restrepo's situation. There may be opportunities for her to transition back to official military medical service, if that's something she'd be interested in. Maria shook her head immediately. Thank you, Sergeant, but I'm not interested in returning to official military service. I found my new mission here. This hospital needs systematic improvements to patient care, security protocols, and operational efficiency. That's work I can do without returning to active duty. Dr. Rodriguez looked like Christmas morning had arrived early. Dr. Restrepo, if you're serious about staying at St. Catherine's, I want to offer you a position as Chief of Emergency Medicine Operations. You'd have authority over all aspects of emergency department function, from medical protocols to security assessments to staff training. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not ready to assume that level of visible authority. I'm willing to serve as a consultant while working toward medical license reinstatement, but I prefer to maintain a relatively low profile. Rebecca stepped forward hesitantly. Dr. Restrepo, would you be willing to mentor me? To help me become the kind of physician you think I could be? Maria looked at Rebecca thoughtfully. Dr. Hamilton, mentoring requires trust and respect from both parties. Are you prepared to acknowledge that you have significant professional and personal development needs? Yes, ma'am. Are you prepared to accept criticism and guidance from someone you spent 2 years treating as intellectually inferior? Rebecca flinched but nodded. Yes, ma'am. Then we can discuss a mentoring relationship once I've completed my medical license renewal and you've completed anger management counseling. It was a conditional yes, but it was still a yes. Rebecca looked like she'd just been offered a lifeline after drowning. Dr. Rodriguez was already making mental notes about all the changes he wanted to implement now that he knew about Maria's true capabilities. Dr. Restrepo, I want you to know that this conversation changes everything about how this hospital operates. We've been functioning with a world-class expert hiding in plain sight for 2 years. Dr. Rodriguez, this hospital has been functioning with dedicated professionals at every level for years. The problem hasn't been lack of expertise. The problem has been lack of coordination, communication, and systematic thinking about how all the pieces fit together. Turner was gathering his things, preparing to leave for his security briefings. Ma'am, it's been an honor meeting you. When I start my position here tomorrow, I'll be working with a completely different understanding of what this facility represents. Sergeant Turner, this facility represents the same thing it represented yesterday. The only difference is that now you have more complete information about the resources available to accomplish our shared mission. After Turner left to handle his security reports, the room felt smaller and more intimate. Dr. Rodriguez, Rebecca, and I were left alone with a woman we'd fundamentally misunderstood for 2 years. Dr. Rodriguez broke the silence. Dr. Restrepo, I have to ask. These past 2 years, watching us make mistakes, seeing inefficiencies that you could fix, observing patient care that didn't meet your standards. How did you stand it? Maria was quiet for a moment, and when she answered, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen much worse things than inefficient hospital operations. Dr. Rodriguez, I've operated on dying soldiers while artillery shells exploded outside the surgical tent. I've treated gunshot wounds by candlelight in basements while enemy forces searched the building above me. I've performed amputations with improvised instruments while being tortured by people who wanted to break my spirit. She paused, looking around the room at the clean walls, the modern equipment, the safety and security that civilian hospitals represented. Watching dedicated professionals struggle with administrative inefficiencies and communication problems wasn't difficult to endure. It was a privilege to observe people who could focus on healing because they didn't have to worry about immediate survival. The room fell silent again, as we all processed the perspective that 2 years of systematic torture provides on everyday workplace frustrations. Rebecca was the first to speak. Dr. Restrepo, tomorrow morning, when I come to work, how do I face the other staff members who witnessed the way I treated you? How do I explain that the woman I humiliated is actually more qualified than I am? You don't explain anything, Dr. Hamilton. You begin demonstrating through your actions that you've learned something valuable about treating colleagues with respect, regardless of their apparent position in the hierarchy. You let your improved behavior speak for you. Dr. Rodriguez stood up, his mind clearly racing with plans and possibilities. Dr. Restrepo, I need to brief the hospital administration immediately about your situation. There will be paperwork, investigations, credential reviews. But I want you to know that this institution is going to be fundamentally transformed by having access to your expertise. Dr. Rodriguez, this institution will be transformed by the choices its staff members make about how to treat each other and how seriously to take their responsibilities to patient care. My expertise is only valuable if people are willing to listen and learn. As Dr. Rodriguez prepared to leave, he turned back one more time. Dr. Restrepo, is there anything you need right now? Anything we can do to make your recovery more comfortable? Maria smiled slightly, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in 2 years. I could use some real medical journals to read. It's been a while since I've had access to current research, and I'd like to catch up on recent developments in trauma surgery. Dr. Rodriguez laughed, a sound of pure relief and excitement. I'll have a complete medical library delivered to your room within the hour. After he left, Rebecca and I were alone with Maria. Rebecca was still struggling with the enormity of what she'd learned, but she seemed determined to say something important. Dr. Restrepo, I know you said you weren't personally injured by my actions, but I need you to know that I am deeply ashamed of how I treated you. Not just because I know now that you're a decorated surgeon, but because no human being deserves to be treated the way I treated you, regardless of their job or education or background. Maria looked at Rebecca with something that might have been approval. That's the first thing you've said that suggests genuine professional growth potential, Dr. Hamilton. Rebecca nodded, tears still flowing quietly. I want to be better. I want to be the kind of doctor who deserves to work alongside someone like you. Then focus on becoming the kind of doctor who deserves to work alongside anyone, Dr. Hamilton. Professional excellence isn't about hierarchy or credentials. It's about competence, integrity, and genuine commitment to patient welfare. As Rebecca left the room, I found myself alone with Maria for the first time since her identity had been revealed. I'd been observing everything from my position at the nurses' station, but I hadn't said a word during the entire conversation. Maria looked at me with the same direct assessment I'd seen her use on everyone else. Nurse Chen, you've been very quiet during all of this. I felt suddenly exposed, like I was being evaluated by someone whose standards I couldn't possibly meet. I didn't know what to say. I mean, I suspected there was more to you than met the eye, but I never imagined anything like this. What did you suspect? Your precision. The way you moved. The way you observed things. The way you never seemed surprised by medical emergencies. It reminded me of military training, but I thought maybe you'd been a combat medic or a field hospital technician. Maria nodded approvingly. That was good observation, Nurse Chen. Most people miss those details. Dr. Restrepo, can I ask you something? Of course. These past 2 years, when you were watching all of us work, what did you think of me? As a nurse, I mean. Maria was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. Nurse Chen, you're clinically competent and genuinely care about patient outcomes. You notice details that others miss, and you're willing to advocate for patients even when it creates conflict with physicians. Your diagnostic instincts are often better than those of residents with more formal training. I felt a flush of pride at the assessment, coming from someone with her credentials. However, Maria continued, you tend to avoid confrontation even when patient safety is at stake. You observed staff mistreating me for 2 years and chose not to intervene. which suggests you might also fail to speak up about medical errors or unsafe practices if doing so required challenging authority figures. The criticism stung because it was completely accurate. I had watched Rebecca and others torment Maria, and I'd chosen silence over the potential discomfort of speaking up. "You're right," I said quietly. I should have said something. Nurse Chen, recognizing professional development opportunities is more valuable than dwelling on past inaction. The question is, what you'll do differently going forward. I want to do better. I want to be the kind of nurse who speaks up when I see something wrong. Then practice. Start with small situations where the stakes are low. And build your confidence for the times when patient lives depend on your willingness to challenge inappropriate behavior. As I prepared to return to my duties, Maria called out one more time. "Nurse Chen, thank you for being kind to me even when others weren't. Small gestures of respect matter more than you might realize, especially to people who are far from home and operating under difficult circumstances." I left Maria's room with my head spinning from everything I'd learned, and my perspective on hospital hierarchies fundamentally altered. The woman we'd all dismissed as a barely competent cleaning lady was actually the most qualified medical professional in the building, and she'd been quietly protecting all of us while we treated her like she was invisible. Tomorrow morning was going to be very different at St. Catherine's Hospital. The next morning arrived with the kind of tension that comes when everyone knows something fundamental has changed but nobody quite understands what it means yet. I arrived at St. Catherine's an hour early, partly to catch up on patient reports, and partly because I couldn't sleep after everything I'd learned the night before. The hospital felt different somehow, like walking through a building where the walls had been repainted but you couldn't quite identify what color they used to be. Dr. Rodriguez was already in his office when I passed by at 6:30, visible through his open door as he spoke rapidly into his phone while sorting through stacks of paperwork. I caught fragments of his conversation, words like verification, and expedited licensing review, and administrative authorization. He looked like a man who discovered oil in his backyard and was trying to figure out the fastest way to start drilling. The morning shift change happened at 7, and I watched carefully as the day staff arrived. Nobody seemed to know anything yet about Maria's true identity, but word travels fast in hospitals, especially when it involves someone who's been working there for 2 years. I saw small groups of nurses and technicians talking in hushed tones near the elevators, their conversations stopping abruptly when supervisors walked by. Rebecca arrived at 7:15, looking like she hadn't slept at all. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her scrubs were wrinkled, and she had the pale, shaky appearance of someone who'd spent the night reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. She moved through the emergency department like she was walking through a minefield, carefully avoiding eye contact with colleagues who might ask questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Dr. Morrison and Dr. Park showed up together around 7:30, their behavior suggesting they'd spent considerable time discussing how to handle the aftermath of Thursday's revelations. They kept glancing toward Maria's room, clearly wanting to check on her condition but uncertain whether approaching her would be appropriate given everything they now knew about who she really was. Sergeant Turner arrived precisely at 8 o'clock for his first official day, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to military precision. He stopped at the nurse's station where I was reviewing patient charts and introduced himself with the kind of professional courtesy that suggested he understood his presence was about to complicate an already complex situation. "Nurse Chen, isn't it? I'm David Turner, starting as a trauma medic today. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance." I looked up from my charts, noting how his eyes automatically scanned the emergency department, cataloging exits, assessing potential threats, observing staff positions and equipment locations. It was the same kind of systematic visual assessment I'd seen Maria perform countless times, though I'd never recognized it for what it was. "Mr. Turner, yes. How is Dr. Restrepo this morning? I haven't had a chance to check on her yet." She's awake and reviewing medical journals that Dr. Rodriguez brought her around midnight. Apparently, she's been reading continuously since then, catching up on 3 years of research developments. Turner's expression suggested admiration mixed with something that might have been concern. "She also asked me to tell you that she appreciated your discretion last night and hopes you'll consider what she said about professional development opportunities." The implications of that message weren't lost on me. Maria was already thinking about how to help the nursing staff improve, even while she was recovering from injuries that had resulted from years of systematic mistreatment. It was exactly the kind of response I was beginning to understand was characteristic of someone whose default setting was service rather than self-preservation. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from his office around 8:30, carrying a thick folder that looked like it contained enough paperwork to launch a space mission. He walked directly to the nurse's station, his expression combining excitement with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested he'd been making significant phone calls since before dawn. "Sarah, I need you to know that there are going to be some major changes around here starting immediately. Dr. Restrepo's situation has been reported to hospital administration, the state medical board, and several federal agencies that apparently have ongoing interest in her welfare." Turner straightened slightly at the mention of federal agencies, his attention sharpening in a way that suggested he understood exactly which organizations might be involved in Maria's situation. Dr. Rodriguez continued, clearly operating on very little sleep but considerable adrenaline. "The hospital's legal department is reviewing liability issues related to her employment under an assumed identity. The medical board is expediting her license reinstatement process, and administration has authorized me to create a new position specifically designed to utilize her expertise while she completes the credential renewal requirements." "What kind of position?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would be unlike anything St. Catherine's had ever seen before. "Director of Operational Excellence and Emergency Preparedness. She'll have authority to assess and modify any aspect of hospital operations that affects patient safety, staff performance, or facility security. Essentially, she'll be implementing all the improvements she's been documenting for the past 2 years. Turner nodded approvingly. "That sounds like an appropriate utilization of her skill set. Dr. Restrepo has capabilities that extend well beyond standard medical practice." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of 2 men in dark suits, who approached the nurse's station with the kind of purposeful movement that immediately identified them as federal agents. They were polite, but unmistakably official, carrying credentials that Dr. Rodriguez examined carefully before nodding and directing them toward Maria's room. "Who are they?" I asked Turner quietly. "Probably State Department or Defense Intelligence. Here to debrief her about the security threats she's been monitoring. When someone with her clearance level surfaces after years of deep cover, there are protocols that have to be followed." The morning was becoming increasingly surreal. 24 hours ago, Maria had been the invisible cleaning lady that most staff members barely acknowledged. Now she was apparently the subject of federal investigations, administrative restructuring, and expedited professional licensing reviews. Rebecca had been hovering near the trauma bays, clearly wanting to approach Maria's room but intimidated by the presence of federal agents. When the men in suits finally left around 9:30, she made her way toward the nurse's station with the tentative movement of someone approaching a potentially explosive situation. "Sarah, has Dr. Restrepo said anything about whether she's willing to see me? I know I have no right to ask for her time, but I need to apologize properly. What I said last night wasn't adequate." Turner looked at Rebecca with the assessing gaze I was beginning to recognize as standard among people with military backgrounds. "Dr. Hamilton, if I may offer some advice based on my experience with senior medical officers, Dr. Restrepo is probably more interested in your future professional development than in receiving additional apologies for past behavior." "What do you mean?" "I mean she's already moved past what happened and is focused on how to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. If you want to demonstrate genuine remorse, show her that you've learned something valuable from this experience." Dr. Rodriguez looked up from his paperwork, clearly having overheard the conversation. "Rebecca, I want you to know that Dr. Restrepo specifically requested that you be included in the operational review process. She said your diagnostic instincts show promise, and that with proper mentoring, you could become an asset to the emergency medicine program." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears again, though this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than shame. "She really said that? Even after everything I did to her?" "She said exactly that. She also said that your primary development needs are in the areas of professional communication and stress management, both of which can be addressed through structured training programs." Turner was checking his watch, clearly preparing to begin his official orientation duties. "Dr. Rodriguez, when should I report to Dr. Restrepo for security briefings? I understand she has information about potential threats to the facility. She asked to complete her medical journal review first, then meet with you around 11 to discuss everything she's documented over the past 2 years. Apparently, she's identified several ongoing situations that require immediate attention." The thought that Maria had been conducting counterintelligence operations while mopping floors was still difficult to process, but I was beginning to understand that people with her background didn't stop serving their country just because they changed uniforms. Around 10 o'clock, word began spreading through the hospital that something significant was happening in the administrative wing. Rumors circulated about emergency meetings, federal investigations, and major policy changes. The cleaning staff were particularly confused because Maria's absence was being explained as a, quote, temporary reassignment to special projects, rather than a workplace injury. I decided to check on Maria myself, partly out of professional concern for her recovery, and partly out of curiosity about how she was handling the transition from invisible janitor to the center of hospital-wide attention. I found her sitting up in bed, surrounded by medical journals, research papers, and what looked like architectural blueprints of the hospital facility. "Dr. Restrepo, how are you feeling this morning? Any pain or discomfort from yesterday's injuries?" Maria looked up from a research paper on trauma surgery innovations, her expression focused but alert. "Good morning, Nurse Chen. The pain is manageable, and the leg immobilization is allowing proper healing progression. More importantly, I've been reviewing recent developments in emergency medicine protocols, and there are several innovations that could significantly improve patient outcomes here." Even flat on her back in a hospital bed, she was thinking about how to make St. Catherine's function better. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just professional dedication, but something more fundamental about how she approached every situation. "Dr. Restrepo, I wanted to ask you something. Yesterday you said I needed to work on speaking up when I see problems, even when it means challenging authority figures. How do I do that without creating conflict that might affect patient care?" Maria set down her journal and gave me her full attention, the same focused assessment I'd seen her use when evaluating medical situations. "Nurse Chen, effective advocacy requires distinguishing between conflicts that improve patient outcomes and conflicts that serve personal interests. When you speak up about genuine safety concerns, you're not creating problems. You're identifying problems that already exist. But what if the doctors don't listen? What if they think I'm overstepping my role as a nurse? Then you document your concerns, follow proper reporting protocols, and continue advocating through appropriate channels. Patient safety is everyone's responsibility, regardless of professional hierarchy. In my experience, physicians who get defensive about legitimate safety concerns are usually insecure about their own competence." It was exactly the kind of practical guidance I'd needed to hear, delivered with the authority of someone who'd probably dealt with much more difficult personality conflicts in much more dangerous situations. "Dr. Restrepo, can I ask about your transition back to medical practice? Are you nervous about returning to surgery after 3 years away?" Maria was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Surgical skills are like language fluency, Nurse Chen. They may get rusty from lack of practice, but they don't disappear. I'm more concerned about adapting to civilian medical protocols after years of field medicine, where improvisation was often necessary for survival." "What do you mean?" "In combat situations, you learn to prioritize saving lives over following regulations. Sometimes that means using unorthodox techniques or making decisions that wouldn't be acceptable in civilian practice. I'll need to recalibrate my approach to ensure I'm operating within appropriate standards while still maintaining the aggressive treatment mentality that kept soldiers alive under fire." The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Rodriguez, who appeared in the doorway carrying another stack of paperwork and looking like he'd been drinking coffee intravenously since midnight. "Dr. Restrepo, I have updates from administration. Your credential review has been expedited by the State Medical Board, partly due to federal interest in your case, and partly because your military service record speaks for itself. You should have temporary practice authorization within 72 hours. Maria nodded, her expression suggesting she'd expected this timeline. "What about the security briefings? Has Sergeant Turner been cleared to receive classified information about the threats I've documented? That's being handled by the federal agents who were here earlier. Apparently Turner has the necessary clearances from his military service. You're scheduled to brief him and hospital security at 11:30. Dr. Rodriguez pulled up a chair, clearly preparing for a longer conversation. "Dr. Restrepo, I need to discuss your new position and what authority you'll have to implement operational changes. Administration wants to ensure we're utilizing your expertise appropriately while respecting existing departmental structures." "Dr. Rodriguez, I'm not interested in disrupting effective systems or undermining existing authority structures. My goal is to identify inefficiencies and safety risks, that may not be visible from within the current operational framework. Can you give me examples of what you've observed that needs immediate attention? Maria reached for one of the folders beside her bed, extracting what looked like detailed charts and photographs. The pharmaceutical storage system has security vulnerabilities that could allow theft of controlled substances. The emergency backup power systems haven't been properly tested in 18 months, which could be catastrophic during extended outages. And the patient transport protocols between departments create unnecessary infection risks. Dr. Rodriguez was taking notes rapidly, his expression growing more concerned with each item Maria mentioned. How long have these problems existed? All of them were present when I started working here 2 years ago. I've been documenting their progression and identifying solutions, but I couldn't implement changes without compromising my cover identity. What kind of solutions? Maria pulled out detailed schematics that looked like they'd been prepared by someone with engineering training. Modified pharmaceutical storage with biometric access controls and real-time inventory monitoring. Upgraded backup power systems with automated testing protocols and redundant fuel supplies. And revised patient transport procedures that maintain sterile barriers while improving efficiency. Dr. Rodriguez was staring at the documentation with something approaching awe. Dr. Restrepo, this is the most comprehensive operational analysis I've ever seen. How did you develop this level of systems thinking? Military medical officers are trained to assess and optimize complex logistical operations under resource constraints. Civilian hospitals have similar challenges, just with different operational parameters and risk factors. Turner appeared in the doorway, clearly ready for his security briefing. Dr. Restrepo, I understand you have threat assessments to discuss. Should we handle this privately or include Dr. Rodriguez in the briefing? Dr. Rodriguez should be included. As head of emergency medicine, he needs to understand the security environment affecting patient care. Turner pulled up another chair and withdrew a notebook, his posture suggesting he was transitioning into official military mode. Ma'am, what can you tell us about the potential threats you've identified? Maria pulled out a different folder, this one containing surveillance photographs and detailed written observations. 3 categories of concern. First, the maintenance contractor I mentioned yesterday has been conducting systematic reconnaissance of security systems, pharmaceutical storage, and computer network access points. His behavior suggests intelligence gathering rather than legitimate maintenance activities. Turner was taking detailed notes, his expression growing more serious with each item. What's his background? Pakistani national, entered the country 6 months ago on a work visa, hired by the hospital's contracting company 3 weeks ago, despite having no relevant experience. He's been asking questions about staff schedules, building layouts, and emergency protocols that go well beyond his job requirements. Dr. Rodriguez looked alarmed. Are you saying we have a potential terrorist working in our building? I'm saying we have someone conducting intelligence gathering activities that could support planning for future attacks. Whether he's acting alone or as part of a larger organization requires further investigation. Turner was nodding grimly. What else have you observed? Second category involves external surveillance. Over the past 6 months, I've documented repeated reconnaissance activities by individuals who appear to be mapping the facility's security perimeter, staff movement patterns, and emergency response procedures. Maria showed them photographs of people taking pictures of building entrances, timing security guard rotations, and observing staff arrival and departure schedules. The images were taken from angles that suggested she'd been conducting counter-surveillance while performing her cleaning duties. Third category involves internal security vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile actors. Inadequate background checks for contract employees, insufficient access controls for sensitive areas, and communication systems that could be compromised through standard cyber attack methodologies. Turner was writing rapidly, clearly understanding the implications of what Maria was describing. Ma'am, have you identified any immediate threats that require emergency response? Nothing suggesting imminent attack, but enough activity to indicate this facility is being evaluated as a potential target. The presence of federal employees as patients, the hospital's role in regional emergency response, and its proximity to government installations make it strategically significant. Dr. Rodriguez was looking increasingly overwhelmed by the scope of the security issues Maria had identified. Dr. Restrepo, how have you been monitoring all of this while working as a janitor? Cleaning staff have access to every area of the hospital, interact with all categories of employees, and are generally invisible to people conducting surveillance activities. It was an ideal cover for counterintelligence operations. Turner looked up from his notes. Ma'am, this level of documentation suggests extensive training in surveillance and counter-surveillance techniques that goes beyond standard military medical training. Maria was quiet for a moment, clearly deciding how much to reveal about her background. My military service included assignments that required additional specialized training. The skills I developed during those assignments have proven useful in civilian environments. The implications of that statement weren't lost on anyone in the room. Maria hadn't just been a military surgeon. She'd been involved in intelligence operations that required counter-surveillance training. Dr. Rodriguez was shaking his head in amazement. Dr. Restrepo, you've been conducting a 2-year security assessment while we thought you were just cleaning floors. I've been serving in whatever capacity was needed to protect lives and maintain operational security. The specific methods were less important than ensuring this facility could continue providing medical care without interference from hostile actors. Turner was reviewing his notes, clearly preparing to report everything to appropriate security agencies. Ma'am, I'll need to brief federal authorities about these threats immediately. They'll want detailed debriefings and access to all your documentation. I'm prepared for that. I've maintained comprehensive records using techniques that ensure evidence integrity for potential legal proceedings. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, hesitating when she saw the serious nature of the conversation taking place. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I can come back later. Maria looked at Rebecca with an expression that might have been approval. Dr. Hamilton, please join us. As an emergency medicine resident, you should understand the security environment affecting patient care at this facility. Rebecca entered hesitantly, clearly intimidated by the presence of federal security briefings and counterintelligence documentation. Dr. Restrepo, I just wanted to check on your recovery and see if there was anything you needed. Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Actually, your arrival is well-timed. Dr. Rodriguez and I were discussing training programs to improve professional communication and stress management among medical staff. Your participation in those programs could serve as a model for other residents. It was a generous offer that reframed Rebecca's development needs as leadership opportunities rather than punishment for past behavior. Rebecca looked surprised and grateful for the chance to contribute something positive to the conversation. Turner was checking his watch again, clearly needing to report the security briefing to appropriate authorities. Dr. Restrepo, I'll coordinate with federal agencies about your threat assessments and ensure proper protective measures are implemented for the facility. Sergeant Turner, I recommend treating this as an ongoing operation rather than a one-time briefing. The threats I've identified are likely to evolve, and continued monitoring will be necessary to ensure patient and staff safety. After Turner left to handle his security reports, Dr. Rodriguez returned his attention to the operational improvements Maria had proposed. Dr. Restrepo, assuming we can implement your recommendations for facility security and operational efficiency, what timeline are you thinking for these changes? The pharmaceutical storage modifications can be completed within 2 weeks. Backup power system upgrades will require 1 month for equipment procurement and installation. Patient transport protocol revisions can be implemented immediately with appropriate staff training. Dr. Rodriguez was making notes about budget requirements and implementation schedules. What about staff training? You mentioned that some of our procedures don't meet optimal standards. Maria pulled out another folder, this one, containing what looked like detailed performance assessments for every department in the hospital. I've documented training needs across all staff categories. Some deficiencies require formal education programs, others can be addressed through modified procedures and enhanced supervision. Rebecca was looking at the folders with something approaching disbelief. Dr. Restrepo, how did you gather all this information without anyone noticing? Dr. Hamilton, people generally don't pay attention to cleaning staff unless something goes wrong. That invisibility allows observation of normal work patterns without the behavioral modifications that occur when people know they're being evaluated. You've been conducting performance reviews on all of us for 2 years? I've been identifying opportunities for professional development and operational improvement. The goal wasn't evaluation for its own sake, but rather understanding how to optimize patient care outcomes. Dr. Rodriguez was studying the documentation with growing excitement. Dr. Restrepo, this represents the most comprehensive assessment of hospital operations I've ever seen. With your permission, I'd like to share these findings with department heads and begin implementing your recommendations immediately. Dr. Rodriguez, I recommend starting with the security modifications and critical safety issues before addressing efficiency improvements. Some of the changes I'm proposing will require staff adaptation periods. and it's better to implement them systematically rather than overwhelming people with simultaneous transitions. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of two women in business suits, who introduced themselves as representatives from the State Medical Board. They were carrying official documentation related to Maria's license reinstatement and had questions about her employment history and current qualifications. I decided to give them privacy for the official proceedings and returned to my nursing duties, but the entire morning had fundamentally altered my understanding of St. Catherine's Hospital. We weren't just a medical facility anymore. We were apparently a strategic asset that had been under threat for 2 years, protected by someone we'd all dismissed as intellectually inferior. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors to Maria's room, hospital administrators seeking clarification about her new position and authority, federal agents requesting additional security briefings, medical board representatives completing credential verification, and a growing number of staff members who'd heard rumors about the cleaning lady who'd turned out to be a decorated military surgeon. I watched the reactions of different staff members as word spread through the hospital. Some people were embarrassed about how they'd treated Maria over the past 2 years. Others were defensive, claiming they'd always suspected there was more to her story. A few seemed genuinely angry that she'd been deceiving them by working under an assumed identity. But the most common reaction was simple amazement that someone with her qualifications had been cleaning their floors, while they struggled with medical challenges she could have solved with one hand behind her back. Around 3 o'clock, Dr. Morrison finally worked up the courage to visit Maria's room. I happened to be checking on adjacent patients and overheard their conversation. "Dr. Restrupo, I owe you an apology for the way I've treated you over the past 2 years. I participated in behavior that was unprofessional and unkind, and I'm ashamed of my actions." Maria looked up from the medical journal she was reading, her expression neutral but not hostile. "Dr. Morrison, your apology is noted and appreciated. More importantly, what do you plan to do differently going forward? I want to learn from you. I want to understand how someone with your experience approaches medical challenges. And I want to make sure I never treat another colleague with such disrespect, regardless of their apparent position." "Those are appropriate goals, Dr. Morrison. I'm willing to provide mentoring as my schedule allows, but I expect genuine commitment to professional development rather than superficial attempts to assuage guilt about past behavior." "Yes, ma'am. I understand. Dr. Morrison, your surgical technique shows promise, but your patient interaction skills need significant improvement. You tend to become defensive when questioned about your decisions, which undermines confidence and creates communication barriers with nursing staff." It was the same kind of direct, honest assessment Maria had given Rebecca, delivered without malice, but with the authority of someone whose standards were based on life-and-death experiences. Dr. Park visited around 4 o'clock, bringing flowers and what appeared to be a handwritten letter. Her conversation with Maria was quieter and more personal, but I could see through the window that she was crying and that Maria was listening with the patient attention of someone accustomed to providing emotional support under difficult circumstances. By 5 o'clock, the hospital grapevine had ensured that everyone on the day shift knew at least the basic facts about Maria's true identity. The reactions were varied and intense, but one thing was clear: nobody would ever look at her the same way again. Rebecca spent most of the afternoon hovering near Maria's room, clearly wanting to spend more time learning from her, but uncertain whether such attention would be welcome. When Maria's dinner tray arrived, Rebecca asked if she could join her for the meal. "Dr. Hamilton, you're welcome to share dinner, but I have conditions. First, no additional apologies for past behavior. That's been adequately addressed. Second, come prepared to discuss specific areas where you want to improve your medical skills. And third, understand that mentoring requires honest feedback about your performance, which may be uncomfortable to hear." Rebecca nodded eagerly, clearly grateful for any opportunity to learn from someone whose expertise was becoming legendary throughout the hospital. Their dinner conversation was fascinating to observe from the nursing station. Maria was clearly teaching, using the meal as an opportunity to discuss diagnostic techniques, patient communication strategies, and stress management approaches. Rebecca was taking notes on a napkin, asking detailed questions about surgical procedures and emergency protocols. For the first time since I'd known her, Rebecca looked like a medical student, rather than someone trying to prove her superiority to everyone around her. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Around 7 o'clock, Turner returned from his security meetings with federal agents. He looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd successfully completed a complex mission briefing. "Dr. Restrepo, I've reported your threat assessments to appropriate authorities. They're implementing enhanced security measures for the facility and investigating the individuals you've identified. Your documentation has been invaluable for their threat analysis. Sergeant Turner, what additional measures are being implemented? Enhanced background checks for all contract employees, improved access controls for sensitive areas, and increased security patrols during shift changes when the facility is most vulnerable. They're also installing additional surveillance equipment to monitor perimeter activities. Maria nodded approvingly. Those are appropriate responses. Have they addressed the pharmaceutical storage vulnerabilities? That's being handled as a priority implementation. New biometric access controls should be installed within 48 hours. Dr. Rodriguez arrived around 7:30 with what looked like official documents and an expression of barely contained excitement. Dr. Restrepo, I have news. The medical board has completed their review and approved your temporary practice authorization. You're cleared to begin consultative medical duties immediately, with full surgical privileges pending completion of skills assessment procedures. Maria accepted the documents with the calm satisfaction of someone whose expectations had been met rather than exceeded. When do you want me to start? How about Monday morning? That gives you the weekend to complete your recovery from Thursday's injuries and review any additional medical literature you want to catch up on. I'll be ready. What specific responsibilities do you want me to assume initially? Dr. Rodriguez pulled out a folder containing what looked like organizational charts and job descriptions. Emergency department consultation for complex cases, surgical backup for trauma procedures, and oversight of the operational improvements you've recommended. Essentially, you'll be functioning as senior medical officer with authority to modify any aspect of emergency operations that affects patient outcomes. It was a remarkable position for someone who'd been pushing a mop cart through the same hallways 72 hours earlier, but given everything I'd learned about Maria's background, it seemed like an appropriate utilization of her capabilities. Rebecca looked up from her note-taking during dinner. Dr. Restrepo, when you start working as a physician again, will you still be willing to mentor residents like me? Dr. Hamilton, mentoring junior medical staff is a standard responsibility for senior physicians. My willingness to provide guidance will depend on your commitment to professional development and your ability to accept constructive feedback. I'm committed. I want to learn everything you're willing to teach me. Turner was preparing to leave for the evening, clearly satisfied with the security arrangements that had been implemented. Dr. Restrepo, I'll be working day shifts in the emergency department starting Monday. It will be an honor to serve alongside you again. Sergeant Turner, I look forward to working with someone who understands operational priorities and can function effectively under pressure. As the evening wound down and visiting hours ended, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary transformation that had taken place in less than 24 hours. Thursday morning, Maria had been the invisible cleaning lady that most people barely acknowledged. Friday evening, she was the central figure in federal security investigations, hospital operational restructuring, and comprehensive staff development programs. But perhaps more importantly, the people who'd spent 2 years treating her with casual cruelty were beginning to understand the difference between authority based on position and authority based on competence, experience, and genuine service to others. Rebecca was the last visitor to leave Maria's room, carrying her napkin full of notes and wearing an expression of determined purpose I'd never seen from her before. As she passed the nursing station, she stopped to speak with me. Sarah, Dr. Restrepo asked me to tell you that she appreciated your professional courtesy throughout her time here, and that she hopes you'll consider applying for the advanced nursing education program she's recommending the hospital implement. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture I was learning to expect from someone whose default response to every situation was identifying ways to help other people improve their capabilities. As I prepared to end my shift and head home, I realized that Monday morning would bring changes to St. Catherine's Hospital that none of us could have imagined a week ago. We'd gained a senior physician whose expertise exceeded that of most department heads. We'd implemented security measures that transformed us from a soft target into a protected facility. And most importantly, we'd learned something valuable about the danger of dismissing people based on superficial characteristics or apparent social status. Maria had spent 2 years serving as our guardian angel while we treated her like she was barely worthy of basic human courtesy. But instead of seeking revenge or even acknowledgement for her sacrifices, she was focused on using her newfound authority to make St. Catherine's the best hospital it could possibly be. Monday morning was going to be very different indeed. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp energy that comes when everyone knows they're witnessing the beginning of something significant. I arrived at St. Catherine's 30 minutes early, partly out of curiosity about how Maria's first day as an official physician would unfold, and partly because I suspected the entire dynamic of the hospital was about to change in ways none of us could predict. The transformation was immediately apparent. Enhanced security personnel were stationed at every entrance, their presence subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. New biometric scanners had been installed outside the pharmaceutical storage areas, and additional surveillance cameras were visible in locations that had previously been blind spots. The hospital felt more secure, more professional, more serious about its responsibilities. Dr. Rodriguez was in his office by 6:30, reviewing what appeared to be comprehensive briefing materials, and speaking rapidly into his phone with someone who was clearly helping him prepare for Maria's integration into the medical staff. Through his open door, I could see organizational charts, staff schedules, and what looked like detailed protocols for implementing the operational changes Maria had recommended. Rebecca arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, carrying a notebook that appeared to contain several days' worth of preparation notes. She'd spent the weekend reviewing medical literature, surgical techniques, and patient communication strategies, clearly determined to demonstrate her commitment to the professional development opportunities Maria had offered. Her entire demeanor had changed from the arrogant confidence she'd displayed for 2 years to something that looked more like focused determination mixed with genuine humility. Turner was already at his assigned station in the emergency department, familiarizing himself with equipment and procedures while maintaining the kind of situational awareness I was beginning to recognize as standard among people with military backgrounds. He moved through the trauma bays with systematic precision, checking supplies, testing communication systems, and positioning himself to provide optimal support when emergency situations developed. At 7:45, Dr. Morrison and Dr. Park arrived together, their conversation stopping abruptly when they saw the enhanced security measures and realized that everything they'd learned about Maria over the weekend was about to become operational reality. They looked nervous, excited, and slightly intimidated by the prospect of working alongside someone whose credentials made their own medical training seem elementary by comparison. The morning shift change happened with unusual efficiency, as if everyone understood that today marked a transition from business as usual to something requiring higher standards of performance. Nurses were more attentive to detail, technicians were more systematic in their procedures, and even the support staff seemed to move with greater purpose and precision. At 8 o'clock exactly, Maria appeared in the emergency department entrance, dressed in pristine surgical scrubs with a white coat that bore her name and the title, Director of Operational Excellence and Emergency Preparedness. She moved with the same quiet efficiency she'd demonstrated as a cleaning lady, but now there was an additional quality to her presence, an authority that came from people finally understanding who they were looking at. The reaction throughout the emergency department was immediate and profound. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Medical staff straightened their posture unconsciously. Even the ambient noise level seemed to decrease as everyone absorbed the reality that the woman they'd dismissed for 2 years was now the senior medical officer responsible for overseeing their performance. Dr. Rodriguez approached Maria with the kind of respectful attention usually reserved for visiting dignitaries or department heads from prestigious medical institutions. Dr. Restrepo, welcome to your first official day. I've prepared briefing materials about current cases, staffing schedules, and the operational improvements you wanted to implement immediately. Maria accepted the materials with the same calm focus she'd brought to every task I'd ever seen her perform. Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. I'd like to begin with a comprehensive assessment of current emergency operations, followed by meetings with department heads about the modifications we discussed. Of course, I've scheduled you to observe in Trauma Bay 1 for the first hour, then meet with nursing supervisors, pharmacy staff, and security personnel about the protocol changes. Rebecca stepped forward hesitantly, clearly wanting to participate in whatever learning opportunities might be available, but uncertain about how to approach someone whose authority had been so dramatically redefined over the weekend. Dr. Restrepo, if it's appropriate, I'd like to observe your clinical work today. I know I have my regular resident duties, but I was hoping to learn from your approach to emergency medicine. Maria looked at Rebecca with an expression that might have been approval mixed with assessment. Dr. Hamilton, you're welcome to observe when your primary responsibilities allow. However, I expect you to function as a learning observer rather than attempting to impress me with knowledge you don't yet possess. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Turner had positioned himself near the trauma bay entrance, clearly ready to provide support when emergency cases arrived. Maria noticed his positioning and nodded approvingly, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between professionals who understood each other's capabilities without needing detailed explanations. The first test of Maria's new role came at 8:23, when ambulances arrived with multiple casualties from a construction accident. 3 workers with varying degrees of traumatic injuries, requiring immediate assessment, treatment prioritization, and coordinated medical response. It was exactly the kind of situation where Maria's military medical experience would either prove invaluable or demonstrate that civilian hospital procedures required different approaches than field surgery. Dr. Rodriguez immediately deferred to Maria's authority, stepping back to observe how someone with her background would handle complex trauma cases in a civilian setting. Rebecca positioned herself where she could watch Maria's diagnostic process without interfering with patient care. Turner moved into support position, ready to provide assistance with whatever protocols Maria might implement. The transformation in Maria's demeanor was remarkable to witness. The quiet, methodical cleaning lady disappeared entirely, replaced by a command presence that took control of the emergency response, with the kind of calm authority that comes from handling life-and-death situations in much more challenging environments. She moved between the 3 patients with systematic efficiency, conducting rapid assessments that revealed diagnostic insights other physicians might have missed. Patient 1 has internal bleeding that's more severe than the obvious external injuries suggest, she announced to the trauma team, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone whose assessments had kept people alive under fire. He needs immediate surgical intervention. Patient 2 has spinal trauma that requires immobilization protocols before any other treatment. Patient 3 appears stable but shows signs of delayed shock that could become critical within the next hour. Her rapid-fire diagnostic assessments were accompanied by specific treatment instructions, delivered with the kind of precision that made it clear she'd handled similar situations countless times before. The medical staff responded to her authority without question, partly because her credentialing gave her official status, and partly because her competence was immediately obvious to anyone with medical training. Dr. Rodriguez was taking detailed notes, clearly studying Maria's approach to trauma assessment and treatment prioritization. Rebecca was writing furiously in her notebook, trying to capture every technique and decision process she could observe. Turner was providing seamless support, anticipating Maria's needs and ensuring that equipment and medications were available before she requested them. The entire emergency response was completed in 47 minutes, with all 3 patients stabilized and transferred to appropriate specialists for ongoing care. What would normally have been a chaotic, stressful situation involving multiple physicians and extended treatment time had been handled with the kind of systematic efficiency that spoke of extensive experience managing complex medical emergencies. As the trauma bays returned to normal operations, Dr. Rodriguez approached Maria with an expression combining admiration and slight intimidation. "Dr. Restrepo, that was the most efficient trauma response I've witnessed in 15 years of emergency medicine. Your diagnostic speed and treatment prioritization were extraordinary." Maria was cleaning her hands with the same methodical attention to detail she'd brought to every task, whether medical or custodial. Dr. Rodriguez's efficient trauma response is a function of systematic assessment protocols and clear communication about treatment priorities. The techniques I used are standard field surgery procedures adapted for civilian hospital capabilities. Could you teach those techniques to our medical staff? Because what I just observed represents a significant improvement over our current emergency response procedures. Teaching improved trauma protocols is exactly the kind of operational enhancement I was hired to implement. I'd recommend starting with workshops for attending physicians, then expanding to include residents and nursing staff. Rebecca was reviewing her notes, clearly trying to understand the diagnostic techniques she'd observed. "Dr. Restrepo, how did you identify the internal bleeding so quickly? The external injuries didn't seem that severe." "Dr. Hamilton, field experience teaches you to recognize subtle indicators that might not be emphasized in civilian medical training. Blood pressure patterns, skin color changes, patient positioning preferences, and response to pain stimuli all provide diagnostic information if you know how to interpret them. Could you show me what to look for? I want to develop that kind of diagnostic intuition." Maria studied Rebecca's face for a moment, clearly assessing her motivation and commitment level. "Dr. Hamilton, developing advanced diagnostic skills requires extensive practice and willingness to accept correction when your assessments are wrong. Are you prepared for that kind of intensive training? Yes, ma'am. I want to learn everything you're willing to teach me. Turner had been observing the interaction between Maria and the medical staff, and his expression suggested approval at how quickly everyone was adapting to her authority and expertise. Dr. Restrepo, if I may say so, your integration into civilian medical practice appears to be proceeding smoothly. Sergeant Turner, the transition is successful because the core mission remains the same regardless of the operational environment. Saving lives, preventing complications, and ensuring optimal patient outcomes are universal objectives that transcend military versus civilian distinctions. Dr. Morrison and Dr. Park had been observing from a respectful distance, clearly wanting to participate in whatever learning opportunities were developing, but uncertain about how to approach someone whose expertise so dramatically exceeded their own. Maria noticed their hesitation and addressed them directly. Dr. Morrison, Dr. Park, I understand you have questions about the techniques you observed this morning. Rather than standing there wondering whether you should speak up, why don't you join the discussion? They approached with the kind of cautious respect usually reserved for encountering celebrities or high-ranking officials. Dr. Morrison was the first to find his voice. Dr. Restrepo, your approach to patient assessment was unlike anything I learned in medical school. You seemed to identify problems that weren't obvious from standard diagnostic procedures. Dr. Morrison, standard diagnostic procedures are designed for controlled environments where you have unlimited time and resources. Field medicine teaches you to extract maximum information from minimal data, because delayed diagnosis often means patient death. Dr. Park was studying her own notes from observing the trauma response. Dr. Restrepo, could you explain how you prioritize treatment for the 3 patients? Because your decisions seem to contradict the apparent severity of their injuries. Dr. Park, apparent injury severity can be misleading if you focus only on obvious trauma. Effective triage requires assessing which patients are most likely to deteriorate rapidly without immediate intervention, not just which patients appear to be suffering the most. The impromptu teaching session continued for another 20 minutes, with Maria providing detailed explanations of diagnostic techniques, treatment prioritization strategies, and communication protocols that optimized emergency response efficiency. The medical staff listened with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for lectures by world-renowned specialists, which, I was beginning to understand, Maria essentially was. Around 10 o'clock, Maria began her scheduled meetings with department heads about implementing the operational improvements she'd documented during her 2 years of covert assessment. I was included in the nursing staff briefing, which provided insight into the scope of changes she was proposing for hospital operations. The nursing supervisor, Janet Walsh, was a 20-year veteran who'd seen multiple administrators come and go with promises of revolutionary improvements that usually amounted to additional paperwork and reduced efficiency. She approached the meeting with the kind of skeptical professionalism that comes from extensive experience with healthcare bureaucracy. Dr. Restrepo, I understand you have recommendations for modifying our nursing protocols. I'm interested in hearing your suggestions, but I want to be clear that any changes need to improve patient care without creating additional administrative burdens for my staff. Maria had prepared detailed documentation that included workflow analyses, efficiency assessments, and proposed modifications with projected outcomes. Ms. Walsh, my recommendations focus on eliminating unnecessary procedures while enhancing protocols that directly impact patient safety. The goal is to reduce administrative overhead while improving clinical outcomes. She presented a comprehensive analysis of nursing procedures, identifying bottlenecks, redundancies, and missed opportunities for optimization. Her recommendations included modified patient monitoring protocols, streamlined medication administration procedures, and enhanced communication systems between nursing staff and physicians. For example, Maria continued, current medication administration requires 17 separate documentation steps, 12 of which are redundant safety checks that don't actually improve patient outcomes. I'm recommending a modified protocol that maintains essential safety verification while eliminating bureaucratic redundancy. Janet was reviewing the proposed changes with growing interest. Dr. Restrepo, this analysis is more comprehensive than anything administration has provided in my 20 years here. How did you gather this level of detailed information about nursing operations? Ms. Walsh, I spent 2 years observing nursing staff performance under normal working conditions. Since I was invisible to most people, I could document actual workflow patterns rather than the theoretical procedures described in policy manuals. You've been conducting time motion studies on my nurses for 2 years? I've been identifying opportunities for professional development and operational improvement. The nursing staff at St. Catherine's demonstrates high levels of competence and dedication, but they're operating within systems that don't optimize their capabilities. Janet was clearly impressed by the thoroughness of Maria's assessment and the practical nature of her recommendations. Dr. Restrepo, these modifications would probably save my staff about 2 hours per shift while improving patient monitoring capabilities. When can we start implementing them? We can begin immediately with the communication protocol changes, then phase in the medication administration modifications over the next 2 weeks. I'd recommend starting with volunteer adoption by interested staff members, then expanding based on their feedback and results. The meeting continued for another hour, covering topics ranging from patient transport procedures to infection control protocols to emergency response coordination. Each area Maria addressed included detailed analysis, specific recommendations, and projected improvements in both efficiency and patient outcomes. As word spread through the hospital about the scope and quality of Maria's operational assessments, department heads began requesting meetings to discuss their own areas of responsibility. The pharmacy director wanted to review medication storage and distribution systems. The facilities manager was interested in maintenance procedures and equipment optimization. Even the administrative staff requested briefings about documentation and workflow improvements. By noon, it was clear that Maria's transition from cleaning lady to senior medical officer was proceeding more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. Her combination of clinical expertise, operational knowledge, and institutional understanding made her uniquely qualified to address problems that had persisted for years without effective solutions. Rebecca had been following Maria throughout the morning, observing her interactions with different departments and taking detailed notes about management techniques, communication strategies, and problem-solving approaches. During the lunch break, she approached Maria with questions about professional development that went beyond medical procedures. Dr. Restrepo, watching you work with different departments this morning, I realized that being a good physician requires more than just clinical skills. You demonstrate leadership capabilities that I don't think I've developed yet. Maria was reviewing patient charts while eating a sandwich, multitasking with the efficiency I'd come to expect from someone whose background required optimal use of available time. Dr. Hamilton, leadership in medical settings requires understanding that every person's contribution affects patient outcomes. Treating colleagues with respect isn't just about being nice. It's about optimizing team performance under pressure. How do I develop that kind of leadership mindset? Because I realize now that my behavior over the past 2 years demonstrated exactly the opposite of effective leadership. Dr. Hamilton, effective leadership begins with competence in your primary responsibilities. You can't lead others effectively until you've mastered your own role. Once you've established clinical credibility, you can begin focusing on how to help others perform their roles more effectively. Rebecca was taking notes on every word, clearly determined to extract maximum learning value from her interaction with Maria. Dr. Restrepo, would you be willing to provide ongoing mentoring about leadership development? I want to become the kind of physician who enhances team performance, rather than undermining it. Dr. Hamilton, I'm willing to provide guidance as long as you demonstrate genuine commitment to professional growth. That means accepting criticism, implementing feedback, and focusing on improvement rather than defending past behavior. I understand. I'm prepared for that kind of intensive development process. Turner joined them for lunch, carrying reports about the security enhancements that had been implemented over the weekend. Dr. Restrepo, I have updates about the threat assessments you provided. Federal investigators have confirmed that the maintenance contractor you identified was conducting intelligence gathering for a group planning attacks on government-related facilities. Maria looked up from her patient charts, her expression sharpening with the kind of focused attention that suggested she'd expected this confirmation. What's the current threat status for the facility? The immediate threat has been neutralized with his arrest, but investigators believe there may be additional surveillance activities targeting other regional hospitals. Enhanced security measures are being maintained indefinitely. Good. Have they addressed the pharmaceutical storage vulnerabilities and backup power system issues I documented? Both are being treated as priority implementations. New storage systems should be fully operational by Wednesday, and power system upgrades are scheduled for completion next weekend. Rebecca was listening to the conversation with growing amazement. Dr. Restrepo, you've been protecting this entire hospital from terrorist attacks while we thought you were just cleaning floors. Dr. Hamilton, protecting people is a fundamental responsibility regardless of your official job description. The specific methods are less important than ensuring that threats are identified and addressed before they can cause harm. Turner was reviewing his security reports, clearly preparing for afternoon briefings with federal agencies. "Ma'am, investigators want to debrief you again about other facilities where you might have observed similar surveillance activities. They're concerned about a broader pattern of intelligence gathering targeting regional healthcare infrastructure. I'm available for those briefings as needed. Hospital security is a component of national security, and medical facilities have responsibilities beyond immediate patient care." The afternoon brought a steady stream of medical cases that provided opportunities for Maria to demonstrate her clinical capabilities while training other physicians in improved diagnostic and treatment techniques. Each patient interaction became an informal teaching session, with Maria explaining her assessment methodology and decision-making process to the medical staff who were observing her work. A cardiac emergency at 2:15 showed how Maria's military medical experience translated to civilian situations requiring rapid intervention under pressure. A middle-aged man arrived with symptoms suggesting massive heart attack, requiring immediate assessment and treatment decisions that could determine whether he survived the next hour. Maria's response was systematic and decisive, combining advanced cardiac protocols with the kind of calm efficiency that comes from handling life-threatening situations in much more challenging environments. She coordinated treatment activities while explaining her decision process to the medical staff, turning a medical emergency into a learning opportunity without compromising patient care. The EKG patterns suggest anterior wall involvement with potential complications that aren't yet visible on standard monitoring, she explained while administering treatment protocols. "We need to prepare for possible emergency surgical intervention while maintaining optimal medication levels to prevent further cardiac damage." Dr. Rodriguez was observing from a position where he could see both the patient treatment and Maria's coordination of the medical team. Her ability to manage complex medical situations while simultaneously training other physicians was unlike anything he'd witnessed during his career in emergency medicine. Rebecca was positioned where she could observe Maria's patient interaction techniques, taking notes about communication strategies and bedside manner. Despite the critical nature of the medical emergency, Maria maintained calm, reassuring communication with the patient while providing detailed information about treatment procedures and expected outcomes. "Mr. Chen, we're treating you for a heart attack that requires immediate intervention," Maria explained to the patient while monitoring his vital signs. "The treatment we're providing should stabilize your condition, but we need to keep you here for observation and possible additional procedures." Her communication was clear, honest, and reassuring without minimizing the seriousness of the situation. The patient responded with visible relaxation, clearly trusting someone who projected competence and a genuine concern for his welfare. The cardiac emergency was resolved successfully after 90 minutes of intensive treatment, with the patient stabilized and transferred to cardiac intensive care for ongoing monitoring. Maria's handling of the situation had been flawless from both clinical and educational perspectives, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded those of most attending physicians. Dr. Rodriguez approached Maria as she completed her documentation of the cardiac case. "Dr. Restrepo, your performance this afternoon was extraordinary. The combination of clinical excellence and teaching capability you demonstrated is exactly what this hospital needs to improve our overall quality of care." Dr. Rodriguez, effective emergency medicine requires systematic approaches that can be taught and replicated. My goal is to transfer knowledge rather than simply demonstrating superior performance. Turner had been observing from his assigned position, clearly impressed by Maria's ability to maintain situational awareness of the entire emergency department while focusing on intensive patient care. "Ma'am, your multitasking capabilities under pressure are exceptional. That's exactly the kind of performance that kept people alive in combat situations." "Sergeant Turner, the environments are different, but the core requirements remain the same. Calm assessment, rapid decision-making, effective communication, and systematic execution of appropriate protocols." By 4 o'clock, word had spread throughout the hospital about Maria's clinical performance during her first day as an official physician. Medical staff who hadn't been directly involved in her cases were requesting opportunities to observe her work or participate in the training programs she was implementing. Dr. Morrison approached Maria during a brief break between cases, clearly having spent considerable time preparing questions about techniques he'd observed. "Dr. Restrepo, your diagnostic methodology seems to include assessments that aren't part of standard emergency medicine protocols. Could you explain how you identify problems that other physicians might miss?" "Dr. Morrison, Comprehensive patient assessment requires integrating information from multiple sources rather than relying on individual diagnostic tests. Physical examination, patient history, current symptoms, and behavioral indicators all provide clues about underlying conditions. Could you give me specific examples of what to look for? Maria spent the next 20 minutes providing detailed instruction about advanced diagnostic techniques, using recent cases as examples of how systematic observation could reveal problems that weren't immediately obvious. Dr. Morrison was taking detailed notes, clearly determined to develop the kind of diagnostic capabilities he'd observed. Dr. Park joined the discussion, asking questions about treatment prioritization and patient management strategies. Dr. Restrepo, how do you decide which cases require immediate attention versus those that can wait for standard treatment schedules? Dr. Park, effective triage requires understanding how different conditions progress over time. Some injuries that appear minor can deteriorate rapidly without intervention, while others that seem severe may be stable enough to allow time for careful treatment planning. The informal training session continued until 5 o'clock, with Maria providing comprehensive instruction about emergency medicine techniques that went well beyond standard residency training. The medical staff listened with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for continuing education seminars at major medical conferences. As the day shift ended and evening staff arrived, I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had taken place in a single day. Maria had transitioned seamlessly from cleaning lady to senior physician, demonstrating clinical capabilities that exceeded those of most department heads, while implementing operational improvements that addressed problems the hospital had struggled with for years. Rebecca was preparing to leave for the evening, carrying a notebook filled with observations and instruction from her first day of intensive mentoring. She approached Maria with the kind of respectful gratitude usually reserved for life-changing experiences. Dr. Restrepo, thank you for allowing me to observe your work today. I learned more about emergency medicine in 8 hours than I did during my previous 2 years of residency training. Maria was completing her patient documentation with the same methodical attention to detail she'd brought to every task, whether medical or custodial. Dr. Hamilton, learning is a continuous process that requires daily commitment to improvement. Today was just the beginning of your professional development. I understand. I'm prepared for whatever training and feedback you're willing to provide. Turner was reviewing security reports and preparing for evening briefings with federal agencies about ongoing threat assessments. Dr. Restrepo, today's integration appears to have been successful from both medical and security perspectives. Your transition to official physician status hasn't compromised any of the protective measures you've been maintaining. Sergeant Turner, maintaining operational security while providing optimal patient care requires balancing multiple priorities. Today's activities suggest that both objectives can be accomplished simultaneously. Dr. Rodriguez was completing administrative paperwork related to Maria's performance evaluation and the operational improvements she'd implemented. Dr. Restrepo, I want you to know that today exceeded my highest expectations for your integration into our medical staff. Your clinical performance was outstanding, your teaching capabilities were exceptional, and your operational recommendations are already showing measurable improvements. Dr. Rodriguez, sustainable improvement requires consistent implementation of systematic approaches rather than exceptional performance on individual days. The real test will be whether these standards become routine practice throughout the emergency department. As evening arrived and the hospital transitioned to night shift operations, it was clear that Maria's first day as an official physician had established new standards for clinical excellence, professional development, and operational efficiency. The medical staff who'd worked alongside her were already implementing techniques they'd learned, and the operational improvements she'd recommended were showing immediate positive results. But perhaps more importantly, the culture of St. Catherine's Hospital had begun a fundamental transformation from a workplace where hierarchy determined respect to an environment where competence and service earned recognition. The woman who'd spent 2 years enduring systematic mistreatment while secretly protecting everyone around her had demonstrated that true authority comes from expertise, dedication, and genuine commitment to helping others succeed. Rebecca's transformation was particularly remarkable to observe. In a single day, she'd gone from an arrogant resident who demanded respect based on her degree to a dedicated student who understood that learning required humility and genuine commitment to improvement. Her willingness to accept intensive mentoring from someone she'd previously tormented spoke to both Maria's exceptional teaching capabilities and Rebecca's capacity for genuine personal growth. Dr. Morrison and Dr. Park were similarly affected by their exposure to Maria's clinical excellence and professional approach. Their defensive attitudes about their own competence had been replaced by genuine enthusiasm for learning techniques that could improve their patient care capabilities. Turner's presence provided continuity between Maria's military service and her civilian medical practice, creating a bridge between her past experiences and current responsibilities. His understanding of her background and capabilities helped other staff members appreciate the extraordinary nature of what they were witnessing. Over the following weeks, the transformation of St. Catherine's Hospital continued to accelerate under Maria's guidance. The operational improvements she'd recommended were implemented systematically, resulting in measurable enhancements to patient care quality, staff efficiency, and facility security. The training programs she developed became models for other hospitals seeking to improve their emergency medicine capabilities. Rebecca's progress under Maria's mentoring was particularly impressive. Her diagnostic skills improved rapidly, her patient interaction techniques became more effective, and her leadership capabilities began to develop in ways that suggested genuine potential for senior medical responsibilities. Most importantly, she learned to treat all hospital staff with the kind of respect that optimized team performance rather than undermining it. The security enhancements implemented based on Maria's threat assessments prevented what federal investigators later determined would have been devastating attacks on regional healthcare infrastructure. Her 2 years of covert surveillance had identified and disrupted planning for terrorist activities that could have resulted in hundreds of casualties. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural rather than operational. St. Catherine's Hospital became known throughout the medical community as an institution where professional excellence was recognized and rewarded, regardless of apparent social status or official position. The story of the cleaning lady who turned out to be a decorated military surgeon became a legend that reminded everyone about the importance of treating colleagues with respect and recognizing that true competence often operates quietly in the background. Maria's journey from invisible janitor to senior physician demonstrated that service takes many forms, and that the most important work is often performed by people who never seek recognition for their contributions. Her willingness to endure 2 years of systematic mistreatment while secretly protecting the people who were tormenting her spoke to a level of dedication and professionalism that transformed everyone who witnessed it. The hospital staff who'd learned to see beyond superficial appearances and recognize genuine competence became better physicians, nurses, and human beings. They carried those lessons throughout their careers, creating ripple effects that improved patient care and professional relationships in ways that extended far beyond St. Catherine's Hospital. Rebecca's transformation from cruel resident to dedicated student became a model for other young physicians, struggling with the arrogance and insecurity that can undermine professional development. Her willingness to accept intensive mentoring from someone she'd previously mistreated demonstrated that genuine growth requires acknowledging past mistakes and committing to fundamental behavioral changes. Turner's integration into the hospital's security and medical operations created new standards for coordination between military veterans transitioning to civilian healthcare and established medical staff. His respect for Maria's capabilities and understanding of her background helped other staff members appreciate the extraordinary nature of what they were experiencing. Most importantly, Maria's example demonstrated that true leadership emerges from competence, dedication, and genuine commitment to serving others rather than from official titles or institutional position. Her willingness to work quietly in the background, while secretly protecting everyone around her, showed that the most effective service often goes unrecognized until circumstances reveal its true nature. The cleaning lady who became a senior physician had taught St. Catherine's Hospital that respect should be earned through professional excellence rather than demanded based on social status. Her story became a reminder that extraordinary people often hide in plain sight, waiting for opportunities to demonstrate their true capabilities while serving others in whatever capacity circumstances allow. In the end, Maria's journey from invisible janitor to respected physician wasn't just about one woman's remarkable resilience and professional excellence. It was about the transformation that occurs when people learn to see beyond superficial appearances and recognize that true competence, dedication, and service often operate quietly in the background, protecting and improving the lives of others without seeking acknowledgement or reward. The hospital became a better place not just because it gained access to Maria's extraordinary medical expertise, but because everyone who worked there learned valuable lessons about respect, humility, and the importance of recognizing excellence, regardless of its apparent social packaging. Those lessons created lasting changes that improved patient care, professional relationships, and institutional culture in ways that continued long after Maria's remarkable story became hospital legend. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.